Long now has mankind looked up to the skies and wondered if we are alone in this universe. Many miraculous things have been spotted all over the world, reported by our militaries, and sparked great debates amongst ourselves. I am here to tell you that, ladies and gentlemen, people of Earth, brothers and sisters of all races, all countries, that we are not alone. We have never been alone. That some higher power has sought to spread the gift of life throughout the universe and beyond all comprehension. It is in these times we must learn to love one another. We must not share hate, but joy. We must not inhibit, but we must grow. These beings are our friends. They are our family. They want to help us become better, to see the true potential of mankind. And for maybe one day, we will join them in their voyage to help other beings from other star systems. As shocking as this news may be, it is nothing new. Our governments of the world have known for quite some time that we are not alone in this universe, and we have had contact for many of years, slowly preparing the American public and the publics of the world for such a revelation. We are not alone, and we are about to embark on the greatest journey mankind has ever experienced. Ladies and gentlemen, we have contact. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Contact. Our guest, he's hiding in the basement.
I think he had technical problems.
Oh.
Booted me out
tonight, so I was trying to breathe, so I didn't realize. My bad. Anyway, tonight we are joined by Dr. Jeffery Meldrum, the professor of Anatomy and Anthropology at Idaho State University, who is also well known in Bigfoot circles. Chances are, if you watched any Sasquatch-related programs on Discovery, History Channel, you've probably seen this man, and I would like to thank you so much again for taking time to join us.
My pleasure.
So, can I ask the first question to Claire? Because I was thinking about this all day today. Can I ask you, Jeff, how did you get into this field? How did it all begin for you?
Well, it was a kind of a long and gradual process. It started actually back the first time I heard of the term Bigfoot. I was in 5th grade, about 11 years old, and Roger Patterson, after capturing that historic 60 seconds of film footage, he began showing that publicly. After there had been some discussion with scientific and viewing by scientific panels, he went on the road, so to speak, and had a documentary showcasing that footage. One of the first stops was in Spokane, Washington, where I lived, and so had the opportunity to actually see that showing of the film clip, and to hear him introduce the topic and field questions afterward, it made quite a significant impression. I acquired a copy of his book. I became a member of the Northwest Research Association and had my replica footprint cast and some of the a couple prints from the film that turned out to be historically extremely significant, very early photographic prints from the film, the clarity of which are remarkable, impressive. And anyway, that interest waxed and waned over the years. I did lots of study and reading, the works of Sanderson, and was introduced to John Green's books. Turned out that his niece was my school librarian and had one of the first freshly minted copies of On the Track of the Sasquatch. I was the first student to check it out and utilize it to do a school report and so on. But eventually that had some impact on my interests, either that were already there, latent and active, or instilled. And I pursued a career in physical anthropology and with an emphasis in the evolution of bipedalism. So that's what's brought me up head to head with this topic. It isn't just a curiosity or an avocational interest of mine. It dovetails very closely with the research that I do as a professional anatomist and physical anthropologist, looking at those adaptations of the human anatomy and our behavioral context for walking on two legs, and all the evidence leading up to the emergence of that adaptation. So that's how it kind of the ball got set.
It's very, very interesting, but I'm going to hand you over to my co-host here because he's got a list of questions as long as his arm.
Sure, I can imagine.
All right. So I actually have something I've always wanted to show you if I ever had the chance to meet you. I'm actually from the Twin Falls area here in Idaho, and back when I was about 16, we took a family camping trip up towards the South Hills near Diamond Field Jack Campground.
Okay.
On a school trip years before, I recall watching the scenery out the window, and I see that what looks like this large ape-like face. If I were to describe it to anything close to known human ancestry, it would be Homo australicus, I believe it was.
Australopithecines.
Yes, thank you. Can't talk today. And it was just that was the initial incident that came to mind. So when I heard we were going on a camping trip in the area, I did what I could. I had like all toy night vision goggles, best I could being 16 years old, and managed to actually collect a foot casting that I do have a photo here. Wanted to get your opinion on.
Sure. Well, yeah, that has some potential. I mean, it's a bit rough, but I can see the possible indication of toe pads, toe tips. The backside, the heel, the outline is kind of lost in the shadows, and there's a bit of overflow of plaster. But I'd certainly that there's enough interest there to want to take a closer look. Definitely, a few more pictures from different angles, a little better illumination. How long is that? I don't know who's it.
That was my foot I was comparing to. I'm jokingly referred to as the Bigfoot of the family. I'm 6'7", have a size 15 in male shoe. That was a size 14 U.S. men's shoe.
Wow.
But to give kind of a point of reference just to how big this thing was, and the thing that got the reason why there was a bit of an overflow on the casting was that there were some kids on four-wheelers that caught me off guard, and so it ended up spilling a little bit. But during that sighting, when I was setting up kind of a bait trap to kind of try to capture footage of this thing, I set down a chocolate bars and got the area prepped, then noticed a smaller silhouette behind me of what looked like a child. Now, all the kids were accounted for in their tents, fast asleep. Next thing I know, I realized, wait a sec, maybe this is a juvenile specimen. I jump because I get all excited, and the second that thing realized what I was doing, it darted off, and I couldn't keep up with it. So definitely got in that area.
That's fascinating. And certainly, there's a history from that region of it's not the most likely habitat, but there are islands of montane forest in that region. Just over the border into Nevada is the legend of Jarbidge Mountain or Canyon, Jarbidge Canyon monster, and the Soavits or Soavitsa, as the Shoshone referred to it, the eater of children. And stories of this cannibal giant that inhabited those areas, and the people wouldn't live in those areas, which offered, a lot of resources. They took advantage of those resources, but they would only venture in with larger groups, hunting parties and so forth. No, even the brave warriors wouldn't go solo up into those regions because oftentimes they never came back. So there was quite the tradition of one of my contacts here on the Fort Hall Reservation, who's now passed away, grew up in that area and told a story that was thought to be sort of at the root of some of those traditional beliefs. But he said during one particularly hard winter, a baby was crying and a big hairy arm came up under the border of the teepee and snatched away the infant. And so that from that point on, they referred to it as their children, and they're very, there's a lot of deference. There's a lot of there are stories, traditional and contemporary, that suggest that, especially under harsh conditions, that they can be cannibalistic in the sense that they'll take human prey.
That's a question that I was going to ask you, actually, because I was interested in people going missing in national parks. Do you think there's any coincidence with people going missing with?
Well, I'm sure a lot of it is coincidence, but there could be some that this might be an explanation. I mean, the reaction to such stories about the Soavitsa is that they're just so stories, they're boogeyman stories, and in fact they are perpetuated in some ways and in some areas as boogeyman stories to keep the youngsters in line. You come back in, by the time of your curfew, you don't stay out past, dark, and things like you don't whistle at night. I've had students tell me that grannies always told them, never whistle at night when you're walking home from your friend's house because the Soavitsa will come and get you. And they sound like just so stories, but what gave a whole different twist to this notion came about when an acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine, who worked for the Peace Corps over in Africa, stayed on afterward and became a park ranger. And they were actually trying to develop some ecotourism opportunities with the chimpanzees, and weren't having a lot of luck. But he told a story that he said they were rather careful not to advertise because they didn't want the negativity of it to be perpetuated. But a woman had parked her infant under the shade of a bush while she was just a short distance off, hoeing, tilling the field, weeding, and so on. And a big chimpanzee came along, and that variety of chimpanzee is notably large and tends to be aggressive, but snatched the infant and made off with it. And they all went in pursuit, but before they could retrieve it, the infant had been dispatched and partially consumed by the chimpanzees. And it turns out that there was actually, during a protracted drought in that time period, over the course of about a 7-month period, there were 12 instances of infants or toddlers being snatched by chimpanzees. And so suddenly a just so story, a boogeyman story, actually has its roots in parallel, has a parallel in normal grade 8 natural history under conditions of stress. This probably wasn't a typical. I mean, if it were typical, we would have a lot more accounts. Where it's just like with wolves, they get the bad rap and they get hunted to extinction in areas as a result. But it certainly points to the fact that this could be, as well as some of those 411 cases, could be attributable to this kind of behavior.
That's actually shocking. That's actually shocking. I never knew that about the chimpanzee. Honestly, that's I'm going to
right. Well, it's something that it doesn't make the front pages of National Geographic very.
That's usually something that doesn't come until like later in the documentary, and you accidentally scar the kids you're trying to babysit, thinking that it's a wholesome, nature documentary.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, and there've been, even with chimpanzees and the natural studies of chimpanzees, Jane Goodall and her heirs have provided have revealed some. Well, I mean, I don't want to say shocking, surprising. We shouldn't say shocking because they're natural behaviors, and whether they're natural or abnormal. We have psychoses in our own populations, but there were cases of battles between adjacent bands and what could only be described as murder, if you will, and infants by the one particular female who just systematically preyed upon the infants of other females in the group and cannibalized them. And so, those things happen. They're part of the natural history of the species. And so it's not surprising that potentially parallel types of behaviors exist amongst another hominid species. And of course, the way that humans would interpret or react to those kinds of behaviors, it varies, but it can take on a real sensational, salacious.
I'm never going to look at a chimpanzee the same way again after you tell me.
Well, yeah, it just reflects on those horrific. I mean, even more horrific than that are the attacks that have occurred when chimps, get beyond their.
I have heard that. I've heard that chimps can.
Yeah. Feet become dismemberment, and they have the unfortunate proclivity to go right for the external genitals in the male, and it's ghastly when you consider it. It's nature, right?
Yeah, it's nature. You're definitely right there.
So, when people ask me, well, should I be afraid of Bigfoot? The most of what we hear is pretty mundane. Bigfoot sees witness, witness sees Bigfoot, each go in the opposite direction, and that's about it. But there is this other side, which has its presence more squarely in folklore, or it seems to be absent because the witness never materializes to share the story. They're gone, right? And so, as with any large animal, the potential for aggression, for threat, for violence is very real. So that this isn't just.
It's actually
that just reinforces the naturalness of what we're dealing with, the normalness rather than the paranormal aspects.
Yeah. So Dakota, what would you like to?
I know this is one of the list of questions that Chris said he brought up, but we talked about how there are always behavioral evolutions where species that are believed to come from a common ancestry exhibit very similar behaviors. Take chimpanzees, for example. I do believe there was an article not too long ago where they were observed stacking stones in a certain way that resembled religious structures by indigenous cultures. Based on your experience in the field, what would be the evolutionary origin of Sasquatch? I know it's probably a wide open question.
Well, no, I mean we can sure it could be. You consider it wide open if you consider all possibilities. Again, if we throw the doors wide open and look at suggestions of paranormal origins, then it is wide open. If we keep our feet on the ground and consider it first, at least in a parsimonious way, as by more conventional explanations of a question of natural history, then where would they arise? And even this question has created a bit of a split between the Bigfoot amongst the Bigfoot community, and that the ape versus the forest people. And so there's no question in my mind that
we've lost our guest, ladies and gentlemen, but don't worry, I'm sure he'll be back.
He has the link
shortly, guys.
You know, Chris is always making fun of me for internet connection issues. That's pretty much the whole state of Idaho, unless you hit more towards the capital.
He's back.
There you go.
Add him back in there.
We got
All
it.
right, my internet. I'm not on a hard line here. I'm at home, and so it apparently.
That's fine.
So, taking the more naturalistic approach, there's no question in my mind, based on the attributes that are most consistently attributed to Sasquatch, that we're dealing with something that is a close kin to us, our nearest relative. So that's why I talk about relic hominoids, hominoidea in the taxonomic sense rather than the colloquial. Hominoid can just be man-like, but in the taxonomic sense, it means a member of the superfamily Hominoidea, which includes us and the apes, the primates. And so it's clearly nested within there. So what's the nearest neighbor? Is it a terminal branch off of the radiation of grade 8? Since it almost certainly originated from Asia, as did so many other mammals that now occupy America, is it most closely related to the living orangutan? If it is, if we could connect dots between Gigantopithecus and Sasquatch, then that would be a pretty cool scenario, because recently DNA evidence has suggested Gigantopithecus is part of that group of which orangutans are just themselves a relic, of what was once a very diverse radiation of Asian ape. Okay, so there's that, but others would argue, well, yeah, but they walk on two legs. They have a foot that's relinquished that abduction of the first, lined up with the others, and so it's got to be closely related to the human side of that fork between us and the great apes. Well, if that's the case, then yes, it could be something that is a pretty early offshoot from that divergence. Something like you mentioned Australopithecines. I've offered, and others before me have also offered, a big champion of this theory was Gordon Strasenberg, but robust Australopithecines. These were very robust in their chewing apparatus. They had flattened faces because of these deep jaws, reduced canines for grinding, chewing adaptations. And they persisted in East Africa up till about 1.5 million years ago, according to our known fossil record. It's very, very conceivable they could have spread out of Africa into Asia, and as they colonized the more northern latitudes, attained gigantic proportions, just as Gigantopithecus did, and so many other Pleistocene mammals that constitute what we refer to as the Ice Age megafauna. But we're really splitting hairs there. I mean, we're just on either side of this divide between us and great apes. There's nothing to suggest that it's something like a Homo erectus or a Neanderthal relic. Now, not to confuse the issue, but in Asia, some of the relic hominoids that are referred to by the Russian researchers, some of those have little or nothing to do with Bigfoot. I mean, there's no similarity whatsoever, other than describing a hairy, hair-covered man-like creature. Yeah, they're man-like. They leave a footprint that has an arch. They have they have material culture. They attempt to communicate, so forth. In that case, we may be talking about something that is a relic Neanderthal. They're reported from places where Neanderthal fossils and archaeological remains are found, or something like a Denisovans. Now we have another species to add to the mix. The Denisovans were probably concentrated much further to the east and had some similarities. They were very closely related to Neanderthals, but they may have actually had some distinctions as well. But anyway, so the point is, there are two possibilities, two very reasonable possibilities that can be set up as a hypothesis. And I have pointed the merits and shortcomings of either I always get frustrated when people put words in my mouth and try to label me as having adopted positions that I haven't, and they don't understand the the process of how you go about evaluating such hypotheses, I guess. But I'm often labeled and criticized as considering this just an ape. Well, apes are pretty magnificent creatures, and to call them just an ape is pretty insulting, in my opinion. But I don't see, honestly, I don't see any of the attributes that are sometimes used to describe Sasquatch, like language and glyphs, writing with, communicating by written language, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't, as we were talking before the show started, I don't think it requires a great deal of exceptional intelligence to avoid human contact when so inclined.
Yeah. I find it fascinating. This is what fascinates me, right? I mean, we're quite a modern civilization, right? We're getting there. We're getting more technologically advanced with drones and with Google Earth, and we're getting more camera phones, and
right.
You would think someone would catch some amazing evidence. It's just it amazes me how they blend in so well.
Sure.
And it's like you said, with the hunters will go out and the normal animals are good at evading. But these entities, they are really good at what they do.
Right. Well, again, if in many of those instances, if you stop for a moment and just reflect on the reality of it, you mentioned Google Earth, and I've had numerous people try to point out where they think they've spotted Sasquatch on Google Earth. But do anyone who thinks that, do this for me. Show me a good picture, an unmistakable picture of a bear or a deer or a moose. All this coverage and animals for which there are hundreds, if not thousands times more individuals. Those Google Earth images aren't dotted with other forms of common wildlife. So that's out the picture, sort of.
That's right.
Yes, we all have cell phones, and I must admit I'm slow on the draw. If we equated drawing your cell phone out and snapping a picture with drawing a 6 shooter out, I'd be under 6 feet of dirt by now.
I'm the same.
I was very slow to even acquiring a smartphone. I know these kids can whip them out, most of the alleged images are photobombs, and there's some that are pretty intriguing, and some that could very well be Sasquatch. But and even taking a step back from that, just a plain old visual encounter, the credible visual encounters, not the weekend warrior who goes out and has a Bigfoot encounter every weekend, every afternoon off work. Most of the credible encounters, if not all of them, occur by happenstance. They're purely coincidental encounters. People who go out and try, very rarely, if ever, do they have an actual encounter. Now, if you spend a lot of time in the field, you might find trace evidence, you might find footprints, you might hear a sound in the distance. But to actually have a visual encounter is an exceptional and, I think, serendipitous experience for the vast majority. So, for me, it's a numbers game. It boils down to numbers. They are so rare, and then you add to that you're in their backyard. They're familiar with the lay of the land. Our ability to see things, it's kind of like that closing scene in Harry and the Hendersons. I mean, it's tongue in cheek, but it's very true. If Quarry just stands still, doesn't move, we have a real tough time differentiating patterns like that. Vertical patterns in a vertical landscape. Most of the animals we're hunting are horizontal with a flat back, that stands out against the vertical tree trunks. But anyway, it's it doesn't take a lot of smarts to avoid humans. Deer do it on a regular basis. Lots of hunters go without ever even seeing a deer, let alone get a shot off.
Oh, I know people that do deer hunting and stuff like that, and they tell me they'll go out and they'll spend a long time and they maybe not see anything.
Right.
And the deer could be standing 20 meters away and they might not see it.
Yeah. They've done studies where they have observed, they'll introduce X number of hunters into an enclosed area that's fenced in that has X number of deer, and the guys come away and they'll actually, have a helicopter or a drone up above taking pictures. And the guys come out afterward and they say, well, this was a joke. There were no deer in there. And they show them the pictures of the deer that were 10 yards away, just on the other side of the bush, or something like that. I mean, it's been demonstrated that deer are able to evade. I mean, this is preaching to the choir for those that know, and those that don't will have a hard time really appreciating that until you get out in the woods and really realize how rare it is to see any animal.
You're right. You're right, because you're right, because I've been in the woods. I've went into the woods, and then it's amazing how quickly you can lose where you are in the woods, especially if it's overgrown. And then you think to yourself, how do I get out of here before you know it? And then if you think there's an animal somewhere near you, there could be something near you just don't see it.
Oh yeah. No, I had to laugh. There was a British producer, Chris Packham, who set out to make a name for himself by debunking the Patterson-Gimlin film, and he was going to do this for BBC Magazine. They had a BBC wildlife production, but he made a comment in print that I just laughed at. I mean, and that was he goes, "Oh, sure, everyone knows there are there's wilderness in North America and United States." He said, but it's also well known that there isn't 1 square inch of the United States that hasn't been trammeled by backpackers and hikers and hunters and foresters, etc. And I felt like saying, "Hey, Chris, come on over sometime and I'll take you out and I'll drop you off somewhere and put a blindfold on, take you out and drop you off somewhere, and we'll see how quickly you're trammeled by all this human traffic you envision out there." It's much less so now than it was even back when someone like Roger Patterson was out there, because now, the whole backpacking rage of the 70s when I was a kid, that has really dropped off. The amount of people that go out, except for those that go on extremely well-established trails, well-trodden trails, which takes them through just this narrow little slice of the landscape. People don't venture off of the roads or off of the highways. They just don't. And there aren't as many loggers. There aren't as many prospectors. There aren't as many people who make their living off the land as there were 50, 75 years ago.
Yes.
We've contracted back to the urban areas, and even those who get out into the wilderness tend to do it from horseback or from a forest. And so it's most people just don't have a concept of the distances.
I mean the United States is massive. I mean, there's states in the United States that are bigger than Great Britain.
Right.
Even I know. I mean, Scotland, where I stay, there's 6 million population. There's states there that's like triple that. I mean, it's madness. Yeah, I've got friends that are into American friends that are into the hiking, and once they're there, they're lucky if they meet someone else.
Oh, right.
Trail.
Sure. Yeah. That's quite a perk if you're so inclined that you can have that that privacy. That if you don't want to have contact with people, it's actually pretty easy to go to places and or adopt behaviors that limit the potential for interaction with other outdoor recreationalists. So, it's Yeah, what can we say? That's, I mean, I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but it's
Dakota, would you like to?
So when it comes to, and granted, obviously encountering something in the wild, you have to really know the area. The odds of encountering something like Sasquatch, which just by the numbers of sightings itself is a rare species. If someone were to be one of those lucky few that believes that they may have something, say, what they're watching their camp, they're in the area, what would you recommend them to do if they were to want to try to encounter this being closer? Hopefully not to where anybody ends up dead, but
sure, yeah. Well, that's tough. Tough to answer that in a useful way, I guess. I mean, if you're if you think that there's a chance, I mean, and that would presumably be based on some kind of sign, whether trace or auditory or whatever. You know, one of the important things, if you want to contribute to this study, to this search, is to document your experience as thoroughly as you can. You know, so when you go in the field, kind of have some of those tools handy. You know, be able to take photos. You know, give a little thought to the way in which one can best photo document a footprint. You know, put a scale in the photo, for example. Simple thing like that. You know, if you have if you can use the recording feature of your iPhone, or if you have a better digital recorder handy, you know, part of your toolkit as a citizen scientist. You know, learn how to look for sign, look for footprints, how to look for physical evidence like hair samples or scat, and how best to photograph, collect, document, preserve, and report then. And that's the other thing, not only to various online databases, I mean, where things kind of get rolled in, but, you know, maybe bring it to attention of a well-known serious investigator like myself, or other individuals. Cliff Barrickman is a good example, you know, with his museum now has become quite a research center.
Yeah.
And he's, because of the notoriety and popularity of finding Bigfoot, he's quite a lightning rod now for reports. And so his body of evidence continues to grow. You know, as I said, I think we were talking before we went on the air about you know, the potential risks. As with any large animal, there's always a potential risk. But if you're smart, you know, and you are cognizant of the things that can bring out the aggressive side of an animal: food, territory, mate, offspring. You know, the scenario is to find yourself in between a sow bear and her cubs. And so I'm sure the same thing goes for Sasquatch, if that were a possible scenario. So, you know, use common sense, be safe, and but thorough in your documentation. Be objective and not quick to resort to extraordinary explanations for what could be very common, normal evidence.
That is really, really interesting. Honestly, I'm going to be buying your book because I find this fascinating. Can I ask you something? See the Patterson case. I mean, a lot of people say it was faked, right? I don't think it was, because I've watched that over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
And you can clearly see there was a guy that came out and said, "Oh, he made the suit and all that for it," and then there was the guy that did the lie detector test.
Yeah.
But see if you look really closely at the Bigfoot walking, you can actually see its muscles going down its neck.
Yeah.
You can actually see, and when it moves its arm, you can actually see the muscles contorting.
That's
back
right.
away. And I find that fascinating.
It is. It definitely is. The most recent documentary I participated in was an episode of The Proof Is Out There, and they devoted almost an entire hour to Patterson-Gimlin film, and Bill Munns and I and Isaac Tian, a new name. He's a doctoral student at the University of Washington who specializes in computer vision. We have done a treatment of the film that is beyond any previous rendition in as far as nullifying the grain effects of the copies, producing something that's closer to the original than anything you've seen previously. I mean, most of the time when you see the film depicted on documentaries, it's the licensed VHS copy of the film that Patterson provided. Quite on, it's very degraded. It's very scratchy. It's faded. It's difficult. But you know, and the networks like that because it kind of conveys that sort of campy, mysterious air. But I tell you, when you see the stabilized, grain nullified version that has been the result of Isaac Tian's treatment of the film, based on the archive of image copies that Bill Munns and I have collected, it just floors you. I mean, it's just. And then all the details that you talk about can be seen even more dramatically, more emphatically, and you come away even more impressed that this isn't a man in a fursuit.
It's definitely no. It's Bigfoot. But I watched that over and over and over again, and obviously it's like a YouTube upload, right? So it's quite good quality, but it's still grainy. And if you pause it and you zoom in, you can actually see the muscles going down its back. And when if you put it in slow motion, everything moves like a humans would move, like a bodybuilder would move. Everything moves. That's definitely not a suit. That is definitely a Bigfoot.
Especially when you also bear in mind, this was 1967. This was the same year that Planet of the Apes was and
that's right.
So you know, quality of the materials, the capabilities of the special effects people at that time. You know, even now it would be a challenge, but then it was just.
I would say that's one of the best pieces of evidence that there is.
I think it is, you know, and it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that it remains such a singular piece of evidence because that isolation tends to cast doubt in many people's minds. But nevertheless, it exists. It must be accounted for again. It must be accounted for. And if anyone at this point in time that says, "Oh, that's just a man in a fursuit," is just blowing smoke. I mean, they're just wearing their ignorance on their own shirt sleeve because it's anything but just a man in a fursuit. If it's fake, it's the most sophisticated, most amazing accomplishment of the century, and as far as cinematography goes. And if it's real, it's one of the most significant scientific revolutions that.
I think it is. I think it's 100% real. I think it is 100% real. And a lot of people don't realize this, but see the image of Bigfoot and see the Bigfoot stickers, the iconic stickers and all the images of Bigfoot. That's where that came from. From Bigfoot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that the what we call the Patty pose, that famous
the pose,
It's actually kind of fun to go through various other movies and see the various depictions characters in that same pose, whether it's Elf or the Grinch. They do, you know. It's really funny. It's a fun game.
It is, but I would say that was all time. And I think that's going to be, because let's face it, they're good at hiding. Where do you think the future lies for Bigfoot, finding Bigfoot?
I think there's two directions that field research will go if we're going to take a step up from where we are now. And that is, one of those is, as aerial surveillance technologies continue to improve, then the hurdles that I experienced as we tried to initiate different projects, which is duration in the air, and payloads and so forth, and penetrance, the ability to use infrared, or now perhaps, I think we're close, we're not there yet, and I've talked to several technicians about this, the application of LiDAR, laser technology, penetrate the forest canopy, and they're close to the point where they may be able to use it to differentiate large mammals and do census taking of large ungulates and bears and so forth. If that happens, then that'll be an interesting approach to doing surveys. So extending the reach that way. Another way to extend the reach, to cast the net more broadly, is environmental DNA, eDNA, where soil samples or water samples, even air samples under some conditions, can be tested for the presence of fragmentary DNA. Now, one of the challenges of this is, though, there's the collection and there's the analysis. On the analysis side, because, as we alluded to in our earlier conversation, these creatures could be remarkably closely related to us, such distinction in DNA is a fraction of 1%. If you look at how similar we are to chimpanzees, depending on source, it's anywhere from 98% identical. Well, these things, they are on the hominin side of the fence, they could be 99.5% identical. And so we're talking about just a few markers that would differentiate us. Well, when we're dealing with eDNA, it's fragmentary DNA that is then pieced back together. It's identified using particular distinctive markers and then, kind of reconstructed. Well, that reconstruction and differentiation from human sources becomes all challenging the more closely related the creature is. So, it's not going to be a silver bullet. It's still going to take a lot of work and a lot of luck to get good samples, get the analysis completed.
I like the idea of the technology side of it. I like the idea of the drones, because the drones are getting better and better and better all the time. And
they are.
Well,
the biggest hindrance with a drone, a multi-copter drone versus a lighter than air drone,
is a bit noisy.
Is the airtime. So most drones, you're lucky if you can get a drone up that'll stay up for 20, 30 minutes. And of that, 5 to 10 minutes out, 5 to 10 minutes back. You don't want the battery to die and have this drone crash to the ground along with its expensive payload. So they're ideal. I love there was one episode of and I'm doing this off the cuff, so I can't think of the host's name, but Extinct or Extant, I think, is the name of the series. They were up looking.
I know what you're talking about.
Wolves. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So they were looking for these white wolves up in Nova Scotia or somewhere, as I remember, and he had set up a blind and had a little. It was just a lure, not even bait. It was a lure that was made sounds of like a wounded rabbit or something. It was this piece of fur that was flapping spinning in the breeze. Well, all of a sudden he caught a flash of something that darted by. He immediately signaled his team, and they sent up a drone, and they got thermal imagery of these two huge white wolves running through the trees. And I thought, that's what, because there's the perfect application of that kind of drone technology in thermal imaging. It's that immediate response with close proximity. But in contrast to that, using the drone to go out and do some sort of systematic grid survey of a area, that's not practical because you have such a limited airtime and problem of penetrance, consistent penetrance of the forest canopy with the limitations of drone or thermal technologies that are currently available. Now, there supposedly, it's rumored, I've heard stories told of military grade thermal that can look right through.
They'll have something. Pick
up remarkably weak trace thermal signatures. But until that's generally available or can be procured for actual research projects, then
Yeah,
it's a challenge.
the military I don't think the military will let it go. No until that's obsolete. No until that's obsolete and they've invented something else. You know what the military's like.
It's always the next generation has to replace before it becomes really.
Yeah. So Dakota, we've got about what 15 minutes left. Would you like to fire away?
Obviously, like we were just discussing, there are several different factors that can be a hindrance when it comes to this type of research. What would you say would be the biggest hindrance when it comes to potential Sasquatch research?
Oh, well, I mean, again, it boils down. I think it boils down to the numbers game. Anytime you're dealing with a species that is this rare, that is very likely largely active at night, that is very far-ranging because and generalized in their dietary requirements or abilities, potential food sources, solitary, as suggested by sightings and footprints, relatively solitary. Those are the most notoriously difficult species to study in the wild, no matter what it is. So my point simply being, for someone like me or any citizen scientist even to go out and attempt to routinely and systematically identify data attributable to Sasquatch is not practical. That's why so many researchers of the past have set up research centers and sat next to the phone for much of the time so that they could react to someone who has had a chance encounter with a Sasquatch somewhere, and then hopefully can collect interesting evidence that can be analyzed, forensically or otherwise. It's like I was conversing on this topic with a fellow who had ambitions to put together a team, and he had all sorts of great ideas and potentially had access to some interesting equipment that really piqued my curiosity about potential. But he's talking about things like capture or tranquilization or biopsy darts or this or that or the other. These things that you do once you have a Sasquatch. And I'm saying, okay, that's all great and it's good to be prepared, but you've got the cart before the horse. Now let's put the cart back where it belongs. And the first phase is, how do you consistently and successfully detect a Sasquatch? That's necessary. In order to do the phase 2 things that you're describing, you first have to develop the techniques and the methodologies that allow that. Now, there are some people who claim they just go back in their backyard and meditate and project their psychic energy and interact in that way. And if that's happening, great. I mean, I'm hoping they can learn something that's worthwhile to share with us, rather than just more kumbaya stories. But that's the real challenge. I mean, I was working with a gentleman in the field, and just to illustrate, he gave me the opportunity to choose a site here close to my home here in Idaho. So I picked an area that I'd often thought about and really focused in, and found an area that had circumstances. It had a braided stream with extensive sandbars and lots of sort of marginal contact areas, a very mosaic kind of a habitat. Well, we get everything prepared. We were going to just take his vehicle and a trailer. So he picks me up. I jump in the cab. We're driving down the highway for a while, and conversation about this and that and the other. Then he turns to me and says, "So Jeff, what are our odds of success on this trip?" And I said, "Well, let's see. Let's pull over at that next quick stop and let's buy a few lotto tickets and scratch cards, and I'll tell you what our odds are." I said, "We can have every T crossed, every I. We can have every battery charged, every camera works just right, And if the Sasquatch is not in the drainage that I've picked out, but instead it's over the ridge in the adjacent drainage, just 20 miles away, we're SOL. It's just as simple as that. Because this is a moving needle in a haystack. And so, given the rarity, given the disbursement, given the mobility of these creatures, I just it's always a bit of a roll of the dice when you go out there. So that's why the red flag always goes up whenever people lay claim to these constant, ongoing succession of encounters and contacts. It could happen. It could happen. As far as I'm concerned, the burden is on them to document. I'm not going to accept them, no matter how much I trust them. I'm not going to accept their word based on just their telling me that this is happening. They need to be able to document. Otherwise, it's a personal experience. Keep it to yourself, because it's not going to add to the corpus of data that will argue for the existence of this creature in the broad.
I hope one day you do get to get one. I hope you get to capture it, and then maybe we could visit it. I mean, what do you think would happen if you managed to capture one? How would that change things? Do you think it would? I
don't personally. I don't think it's going to rewrite the books. I mean, there will be a crow to eat by some of the curmudgeons out there who have not been as scientifically minded as they might have been. But it will certainly add a chapter. But again, I go back to the discovery, say, of the mountain gorilla. It didn't rewrite books. It just added another chapter. Paradigm shift has already occurred. See, now, if Roger Patterson had brought in a body instead of a film, it would have been earth-shaking, monumental, overturning event, because it would absolutely have contradicted the prevailing beliefs in anthropology at the time, that we were the only upright bipedal species on the planet. Now, after the time that has elapsed, and people have gotten used to the idea there might be a Sasquatch, one, but even more importantly, the paradigm, the context, for the potential recognition of such a species has been established. The cubby is there. It'll just slide into the slot. There's already a place to accommodate it now.
Yes. Well, I hope it works out for you. I really do. I hope you go out next week and you find one walking through the woods. I hope that. Can you tell us a wee bit about where we can find your book?
Sure. The easiest way is on Amazon. Amazon lists it, of course, that Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, or also Paradise K, that's CAY. Parak.com is the publisher of my field guides, the Squatch Field Guide and the Field Guide to Relic Hominoids around the world, as well as a new series of books that I've written for younger readers, learners. It's a sort of fun and activity learning workbook series on all the relic hominoids, including, I even tackled the Yowie.
I'll need to look at that. I'll need to look at that, because I was fascinated with that case. Yeah.
So all those are on Paracay.com. They also carry my book along with all those things and a whole host of other Sasquatch related titles and paraphernalia, fridge, metal art, and all kinds of fun things. So I recommend you go take a look there.
Yeah, we certainly will. And I think Dakota's got all the links there, Dakota.
We'll have the links out for the dispersal of the audio podcast, so everyone can go check that out. I'm definitely going to be looking into it a bit more myself.
Well, and please, guys, that's listening to this in the podcast, remember, check out our live streams, because we had 22,000 downloads nearly a couple of weeks ago. So we need to keep this up. And I would like to thank you, Jeff, for coming on. Really, honestly, Thank you so much for coming on, Dakota.
Yes, thank you for coming on. I believe there's some family members who are going to be waiting for me to be totally ecstatic that I got to show you that photo finally.
Yeah.
Waiting for the I told you so.
Yeah.
Well, especially from Idaho, I'd love to see some more pictures. We'll have to chat sometime after the.
There you go.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah, well, right. Catch you, everybody in the chat, and everybody that's listening to this. Please share and subscribe and like, and catch you all later, guys. Goodbye.
Bye.